All right, let's have a conversation. Then I'm joined by Lelo Mdhladhla, who is an energy expert. Lelo, a broad question. Thank you for coming through, by the way. Broad question, what do you make of this new IRP?
There are no new surprises in the IRP. It's not a far deviation from last year's draft that was released. I think the interesting thing to note, however, is that in terms of the completion of Medupi and Kusile, they've accelerated the completion timelines. Originally, they were supposed to be completed by 2022. Now they want to complete Medupi by the end of this year and Kusile by the end of next year. So I think because of the recognition of the energy deficit that we have, they are making plans to accelerate the completion of those two plants. In terms of the decommissioning of the end-of-life coal plants that you spoke about, there's a slight variation. In the draft, they spoke about 12,000 megawatts. Now it's 10,500. So I think they've adjusted that slightly. But the most telling increase or adjustment in the IRP is embedded generation. So embedded generation is typically generation of power for own consumption or self-use. So it's guys who are putting solar panels on their roofs, be you a consumer or a business. Now, in the IRP, the draft one, it was sitting at 200 megawatts per year. In the updated version that was released today, it's been upgraded to 500 megawatts. So I think there's a recognition by government that given the challenges that utility has, being Eskom, there is a need for individuals and businesses to also look at creating their own alternative means of energy generation and consumption. So I think that's some maturity on behalf of government to recognize that and make allowance for that in the IRP plan.
So in light of what you just said there at the end, Lelo, the whole talk around regulations that would allow people to be able to sell back to the grid excess energy that they generate becomes quite critical in light of what you just said.
It does become quite critical. I think the most important starting point was executed by the previous Minister of Energy then, Minister Jeff Radebe at the time, when he made a blanket deviation to allow companies or individuals to construct generation facilities up to 10 megawatts without requiring a deviation from the Department of Energy, right? They still have to go through the application process through the regulator of electricity. But what it does is that it actually allows companies to make long-term views about investing in their own self-generation. So I think what we're seeing in the IRP is a combination of policy changes that have been happening over the past few years in the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources.
So as we engage with this document, Lelo, and I appreciate that you had to scan through it quite quickly. Like all of us are doing at this point. But I imagine that part of the reaction, particularly from environmentalists, will be a disappointment that we're simply not doing away with coal. I mean, if I got my figures correctly there, Gwede Mantashe is talking about at least 55% of our supply will still come from coal. Are you surprised that we're not doing away with coal?
I'm not surprised. And to be frank with you, I think as a country, we need to be pragmatic about where we stand. Our priority is security of supply. We are in an economic environment that is not growing. We are struggling to pull those levers to drive the country forward in terms of economic growth. And we need energy, we need electricity. And the truth of the matter is South Africa has billions of reserves in coal. So we can't do away with a resource that provides baseload power, as the minister alluded to. So I believe that coal needs to be part of the story, but we need to integrate renewables with the battery storage support to ensure that it becomes feasible. But I'm not surprised that coal is not being done away with. And in the IRP, in the previous draft, there were 6 coal plants that had to be retrofitted with emission technology to ensure that they comply with global emission standards, right? Those 6 plants have now been retrofitted as per the IRP. So Eskom has made great strides to ensure that the existing plants they have do comply with the emission standards globally.
Yeah.
So I think there are efforts being made to ensure that even though it's coal, it's cleaner coal.
Yeah. So a bigger story, of course, previously, if you and I had this conversation some, say, 2.5 years ago, much of it would have been taken up by the story of nuclear.
Yes.
And whether or not we can afford it, whether or not it is safe, because that draft IRP from 2016, I believe it was,
yes,
had a big role for nuclear, some 9,600 megawatts. Today, we're seeing that that's been scaled down significantly. But Quebec, of course, does get a lifeline extension. There's simply no running away from having a bit of it, is there? could it have been avoided altogether?
Well, I think it's the right thing to do. I think given where we are as a country and our fiscal pressures that we have, to invest in nuclear wouldn't be the wisest thing to do. I don't believe that nuclear is a bad resource. I just don't believe that given where our country is at right now, it's the most best use of our company resource, our budget resources in terms of our fiscus. So I think that nuclear does have a place, but I think extending the life of the Koeberg plant by 20 years, from 2024 to 2044, is the mature thing to do. I don't see nuclear playing a part in South Africa from an energy point of view beyond the current IRP.
Sure. Yeah. So there was then this issue about storage, 2,088 additional storage capacity. This is important, isn't it? Because many of the people that argue against whether or not renewables represent a viable option for us for base load always point to the fact that what do you do when the wind is not blowing and you've installed those wind turbines and it's just not generating enough on certain days? What do you do when the sun doesn't shine with all that solar energy and it's not adding to your grid and you still need the energy but you're not generating? Tell me about this storage capacity and why it's important.
Well, storage is going to be the game changer. That's the most exciting part about the energy industry in the entire world, because storage will literally change everything. For example, in the US, there's a company called Mitsubishi, a technology company, that has invested in a 1 gigawatt storage facility in Nevada and Utah. Now, to put into context, as a country, we consume about 240 gigawatt hours of power. These guys have invested in 1 of those gigawatts in just 1 facility in the US. So can you imagine what could happen if we can get storage to a utility scale in the country? So I think the 2,088 megawatts is a good start, but I'm really excited about how we can accelerate that going forward with the advances that we have globally from a technological point of view.
So what we're talking about here, if we were to simplify it, we're really talking about a large battery.
Yeah, a large battery, exactly.
That you connect to and basically connect to the grid.
Interestingly enough, Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla, pioneered a lithium battery in Australia last year in 2018, the largest battery storage facility globally. It was meant to be a pilot project, but now it was so successful that he wants to replicate it in other regions that he operates in.
So the technology now already exists.
It exists. It just has to be cheaper.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is that to make it affordable, it has to be cheaper. And in order to do so, you have to have technology that allows it to be replicated at scale, but also replicated with materials that allow it to be disseminated in different regions and different markets.
Lastly, before I ask you about the business end of it all, let me ask you, Lelo, about the role of gas. If I heard the minister correctly, he was talking about 6,000 megawatts being additional gas capacity. How important is that to the mix?
It's very important because, as we've discussed just now, storage is going to support the renewable story, but you still need a significant support to the baseload coal, and gas provides that. The challenge we have as a country is that we do not have gas reserves. The gas that we're going to have to pull will come from Mozambique, as that is a well-known country with huge billions of gas reserves. So gas is important, and I'm glad to see that in IRP they've actually accelerated the gas to power program. Because I think to have renewables just supporting coal without the battery storage that we require, we need gas as well. So I think gas is an unsold story, an unsung story rather, and I think it will become more important going forward.
So then take me to the business end of things. We've been talking storage, we've been talking the ability of small-scale producers of energy being able to sell onto the grid, that being facilitated. We're talking gas and the likes. What does that do for the energy sector in South Africa? Is this the golden era for the energy sector?
I actually think it is. If I look at other markets and other emerging markets, as South Africa, we have a long way to go. But I think the exciting part is that because the government is giving the country more leeway in terms of how they secure their power and security of supply, it's going to allow companies that are investing in solar PV to start constructing their plants. It's going to allow people who are investing in storage to come to the country and start looking at storage solutions. It's going to allow entrepreneurs who want to invest in these kind of products to start constructing their businesses. So I think an industry will be created, a secondary industry. If you think about it, up until now, the electricity industry has been driven by Eskom, right? You know, if you think about it, up until the REAP program that kicked off in 2011, it was pretty much Eskom. But now that we have a secondary industry being created with renewables, with gas, with storage, it's going to create even more industries. And as we all know in this country, unemployment is a huge issue. So what I would like to see is some sort of integration with the DTI, Department of Energy, Department of Public Enterprises, to see how all these pieces fit together and how we can use this IRP to lever and drive economic growth and employment.
Lastly, in light of what you just said, how important is Eskom in this equation? How important is it that Eskom comes right in this whole equation?
Eskom is hugely important to our country. Eskom accounts for almost 350 billion of our fiscal guaranteed debt. Eskom, as the president has often said, is simply too big to fail, and I agree with him. Will it continue in the same form that it currently exists with the restructuring that is planned? That's not my question to answer, but I do believe Eskom is important to the country, and it's important that Eskom takes us as taxpayers, as customers, into their confidence and give us a full view as to what their plan is over the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Because I think if we know what's going to happen, as a country, we can plan appropriately with the IRP to support us in terms of policy direction.
All right, Lelo, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
Quite insightful. That is Lelo Mdhladhla, who is energy expert as well as Chief Marketing Officer at the company PowerX. We've been unpacking the newly just launched integrated resource plan of government, which takes us to 2030 by way of